first in a multi-part series as part of the Chinatown Hall program over the next week and a half or so. We built the program. Normally, in normal years, we would have the speaker, the keynote speaker for the National Chinatown Hall, which is going to happen this evening, and we'll give you some details on that. But then we would do an in-person meeting, but due to COVID and social distancing and everything, we've moved into a virtual format. So what that's done, well, we are not. We enjoy our in-person meetings and the networking opportunities that it provides. We also think there's advantages to the virtual format, which allows us to have a number of events now over the next week or so. So thank you for being here for the first part of it. Today's discussion, we built this as a roundtable today. So we're hoping that we have a lot of good dialogue and good questions for our speakers, and we want to hear from you. We want you to get out of this roundtable today what you came to get. So encourage you to jump in, participate, add your comments, add your questions. Some quick thank yous and introductions. We want to thank the UB Confucius Institute for their help with this program each and every year. It's been a great program every year, and we have Bruce Acker and Director Liu here with us today for this roundtable. We're going to hear a little bit from them in a little bit. We have Dr. John Wood, who's the Interim Vice Provost for International Education for the University of Buffalo, and Dr. Wood's going to talk a little bit about students from China and how things have changed during 2020 as a result of COVID, and hopefully what the University of Buffalo is looking forward to in 2021. So this, as I mentioned, is a multi-part series. We've got some more pieces of the puzzle. The first piece is this evening at 7 o'clock, which is the National Chinatown Hall, which is put forth by the U.S. China Trade Institute, and their keynote speaker this year is Ray Dalio, who many of you may know, published author, investor, philanthropist, and that should be an interesting program. We actually are going to roll this, even though we're not going to talk about snow here when it's 70 degrees, but we're going to roll this program like a snowball. So every event we have, we're going to have more information to talk about and discuss in the next event. The next piece of the puzzle, and actually Ashika's going to change the slide, there's actually 4 more events coming up. We're going to focus on the one on November 17th, which is the Economics and Trade Program. We're going to hear from Amy Selico from the Albright Stonebridge Group, Huang Yiping from Peking University, and Andy Rothman from Matthews Asia. And this piece of the puzzle is what we're going to then talk about in our next local event, which is on November 19th. And that is our Chinatown Hall panel. So we're going to take all the information from today, from tonight, and from next week, and put together, kind of a boots on the ground response from some of our members. And we're very pleased to have for that next week on the 19th, John DeLuca from Liberty Pumps, Professor Jesse Poon from the Department of Geography at UB, and Alex Siegel from Connex Technologies. John and Alex are here today, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them during this conversation. I believe Jesse Poon's going to jump in a little while, so likely by the end of this we'll have all of our panelists and in preparation for next week. So we're very excited about this. Again, I want you to get out of being here today what you came here. So I encourage, please ask questions. What we're going to do, you're all muted right now just to save on echoes and things, but what I'm going to ask you to do is, if you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have an observation, if you want to tell a story about what you've experienced in 2020, please just go ahead and throw a note in the chat window, and we'll make sure you get unmuted so you can talk. We're going to have some more formal piece of a program for about 20 minutes here, and then we're going to have Q&A and open dialogue after that. And I hope you'll all engage in that. I wanted a couple ground rules. We're going to, even though you can't have this discussion without politics, we're going to try and be as apolitical as possible, both on the U.S.-China relationship as well as the presidential election. We only have an hour here, so we don't have time to discuss the whole piece of the puzzle. I'm going to suggest that even though there's news and fights and lawsuits and things going on, at least at the given moment, it appears that former Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden has a line on the presidency. So then my suggestion is that's the direction we go with the conversation. So with that, let me thank you again, everyone, for being here. We're looking forward to a great conversation. And let me turn it over to Dr. John Wood from UB.
Thank you very much, Craig. And I want to express my appreciation to you and the World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara and our colleagues at the UB Confucius Institute for organizing this event. It's a pleasure to be part of the conversation. I look forward to the discussion to come. We've appreciated working with World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara and the Confucius Institute over many years on a variety of programs. And so we value that partnership. Thank you. I will take a little bit of your time to talk a little bit about the impact, as Craig mentioned, of the COVID pandemic on international enrollment and other things at UB, and take a look forward as well. And focus particularly on China, obviously the country of interest here. You can say the impact of the COVID pandemic on international enrollment and on student mobility generally has been profound, no surprise. This morning we had a virtual town hall at UB on international enrollment, and I had occasion to quote from a recently published report on international enrollment, sponsored by NAFSA, Association of International Educators, and APLU, the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities, which declared that, quote, COVID-19 is arguably the most disruptive event to impact international higher education since World War II. Perhaps that speaks to a lack of historical perspective, given how close we are to the pandemic and really in the midst of it still. And I certainly recall similar sentiments after 9/11. Nevertheless, we feel that the impact on our own area of international education and exchange has been very significant indeed. Indeed, the impact from COVID was felt from the beginning of the spring 2020 semester, since the largest sending country of our international undergraduates is China. And China was in the midst of the initial Wuhan outbreak in late January, when our students were traveling from overseas to begin the semester here in Buffalo. Ironically, my own last trip, international trip, was to China in December of 2019, accompanying our UBCI director, Professor Liu, to the Global Confucius Institute conference. Fortunately, we did not visit Wuhan or otherwise encounter the coronavirus on that trip. This spring, many continuing and some new UB students from China arrived early enough before the US shut down entry by Chinese nationals. Remember, this travel ban was implemented by the Trump administration fairly quickly and was claimed to be a major effort to control the spread. Some of our students, however, were delayed in arriving. Some 25 to 30 others were caught up in the outbreak and either had their travel disrupted or could not leave China at all. For our continuing students, we worked with the Office of Academic Affairs to assist them in making alternate plans that enabled them to maintain progress in their own degree programs. In some cases, students who couldn't come here had to take a leave of absence and hope to begin in a future semester. That plan to do so in the fall, obviously, didn't work out as planned. And some students are still in a kind of hiatus situation. Of course, by mid-March of 2020, the US had its own serious COVID outbreak and began to shut down. And it was at that time, a little after mid-March, that UB, like nearly all other higher ed institutions, transitioned to online instruction. For many of our international students, the challenge was not only in terms of the switch to online or remote instruction, but also the coincident effects such as the loss of campus employment, which left many students resource-starved for most of the semester. And this is a bigger problem than many imagine. You might recall that immigration policy does not allow international students on F visas to work off campus. And so many students will depend on the campus employment that they can get, often with campus dining and shops, the libraries, and other opportunities of this sort, most of which were basically shut down when we went online. I should also note that relatively few international students went home after the switch to remote learning at mid-semester. Since continuing students felt they needed to stay here in Buffalo rather than risk a return home for all kinds of reasons, their budget problems of these students persisted throughout the summer. So a lot of students may have elected to leave at the end of the spring semester, but because of the very uncertain situation, could they reasonably expect to come back if they departed the US and so on? They, I think, prudently decided to stay here during the summer. But again, this sort of exacerbated the problem that they had in terms of paying bills and being able to support themselves during that time. Many of our international students during this period of transition and worsening pandemic in the spring had to avail themselves of counseling services due to the stress and anxiety of the pandemic situation on multiple fronts. I do want to add here that the university, I think, stepped up in terms of ramping up its support services. Certainly our International Student Service Office was responding to many requests for assistance. We increased the emergency funds that were available to international students requesting them and being able to document their need as a result of the pandemic. And a number of our schools at UB also made available emergency funds that became a great help to our students in this crisis situation. Adding to our international student anxiety this summer in particular were the arbitrary and capricious interventions by Department of Homeland Security, proposing policies to make it more difficult for continuing students to remain enrolled at UB and other institutions of higher education if they were studying online. And of course, we fully expected at a certain point that we'd need to remain at least partially online during the fall semester as well, and that's how it turned out. Thankfully, there was concerted action by many parties in higher ed that led to these last-minute policies being withdrawn, and that was gratefully seen by many of us in the field because we were really worried that these kinds of changes in policy really in July would have a tremendously negative effect, not only on new international enrollment, but on the continuing international enrollment. And students were worried that they'd have to depart promptly from the United States and go home when their ability to do so was very much in question. As of fall 2020, UB enrolled 191 new freshmen, most of whom could not come here, and thus are now studying remotely from their home country. There were also 21 new transfer students that enrolled. We had 593 continuing undergraduates from China as well. We enrolled 120 new graduate students and 479 continuing graduate students from China, just to give you a sense of the numbers. The total overall from China for fall 2020 is 1,400 students, or a little bit more than that. And this is, as an overall enrollment, slightly more than we saw from China in spring of 2020, when the number was 1,389. But it was a bit less than what we saw in fall of 2019. Of course, we've been concerned about the remote learners in China who've started their programs remotely and not had the opportunity to see our campus or spend time here. We're concerned about the obvious technological issues, access to our websites, to the internet generally, the big concern about time zones and synchronous courses online, and so on. There's been concerns about the course content that is offered here at UB that might be deemed offensive in China or by the authorities there. So far, I'm happy to say all the reports we've seen indicate that the students who have been stranded in China during their studies at UB are mostly doing okay in their online classes, despite all these impediments and challenges that they face. Relatively few appear to be disengaged, and we can measure that by looking at data, analytic data on the access to UB Learns, which is our UB version of Blackboard, the course delivery platform that we use here. Overall, only 158 new international students were able to actually get to Buffalo for the start of the fall semester. And as you may recall, visas were very difficult to come by. Most of the embassies and consulates were barely open before the fall. And many of them, including in China, were not operating with full staff. So it was difficult to get an appointment and actually see the appointment fulfilled. And that continues to be a big issue for our students who are looking to come here in the spring semester of 2021. Another, well, just to put it in context, I mentioned about 158 new international students actually came here. We normally have well over 1,000 new students coming to Buffalo in the fall. So you get a sense of the scale difference that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. Another big factor, of course, was the travel bans, which remain in effect. So for example, a student who would be coming from China to enroll at UB would be subject to a 14-day ban, and in the sense that if you're a Chinese national, you couldn't travel directly from China to the United States. They wouldn't admit you to the country. You wouldn't be able to get on the plane in China, in fact. You'd have to go to a third country and spend at least 14 days before traveling on to the United States. And that travel ban remains in effect. So it's a factor that will affect students who might consider coming from China if they have a visa for spring semester 2021. And of course, there are quarantine arrangements upon arrival. So multiple stages of the process are affected by the pandemic. I'll note that particularly hard hit this fall, that's fall 2020, was our international graduate enrollment. Only 101 of the typically more than 1,000 international graduate students actually enrolled in person this fall, while 190 enrolled remotely. And in their case, a lot of those students who couldn't come here for visa or travel reasons, other reasons in their home country, were indicating that they would prefer to defer their enrollment to either spring or fall of 2021. And one of the reasons for the deferrals is the students' plans to access optional practical training. We have curricular practical training and optional practical training, which gives, in the latter category, it gives graduates of UB the opportunity to have direct work experience in the United States in their chosen field. And this is a very popular draw for many students, particularly from India, but some from China as well. But given the ongoing travel bans and limited visa services, the spring 2020 enrollment is also looking quite problematic at this point. Clearly not enough students can get visa appointments, and those who do still have major impediments to travel here. So in effect, we at UB at least expect to have a spring semester that's quite similar to the fall. Certainly we expect to have much reduced density on campus because of the need to social distance and to provide for public health protections. And thus, most of our students will be studying at least partially remotely or virtually. And there will be a lot of domestic students as well who are studying remotely. I'm just waiting for that echo to go away. Thanks. We're, as you may have heard, in alignment with the State University of New York planning and the New York State planning, delaying our start of spring semester by a week to February 1 and not having our spring break during the spring semester. Again, these are measures that will better assure public health and protect our students as best we can. But the continued reduced density, certainly, as if you come on the campus these days in fall semester, you see very few students around. And that's apparently working quite well because the numbers from our surveillance testing have been relatively few. I'm knocking on wood here that this will continue, because in the fall semester, our plan is to go fully remote after Thanksgiving until and then through our final exam period, since students will obviously go home for the holiday, and it makes no sense to bring them back after Thanksgiving when there'd be much greater risk of bringing infection with them, particularly now as we're dealing with this major surge across the country. So I'd come back for a moment to the continuing students, international students, including those from China. During the initial lockdown in spring, they faced a convergence of problems, as I noted, in part because many decided not to depart Buffalo, and their fears about not being able to come back and completing their degree programs. There's a lot of graduate students who live off campus and have leases on apartments, and therefore we're worried about those particular commitments as well, hanging over them. For many, the pandemic meant, as I noted, the loss of employment and a real reduction in the resources to support their studies and their living costs here. Stepping back from the immediate circumstances, we see that there is as we've noted over the last few years, a long-term decline in international student enrollment, going back really till 2016. And even though the annual reports of international enrollment has shown some increases, that annual census number actually reflects the students that are on optional practical training after they graduate. And those numbers for OPT have been going up. So they sort of offset the decline in new student enrollment and overall enrollment of students who are actually in degree programs. But we would expect that the upcoming report that will be out next week, in fact, to show the most recent international student enrollment for the country, will show a decline overall as well, not just with new students, but overall international enrollment. And of course, one of the things that IIE, the Institute of International Education, is quick to point out is that international education is a major export industry, providing in a ballpark between $40 and $50 billion a year when you take into account the revenue that these students bring in between tuition, fees, living expenses, and other, magnified costs and impacts that they generate in the economy. So I mean, it certainly has relevance if you're talking about the trade context. I think we worry from the point of view of an international educator about these long-term trends, putting aside the pandemic and the immediate impacts that, we are seeing this multi-year trend in decline, which is very concerning to large universities like UB, because we do enroll so many international students. UB, you may be aware, has been among the top 25 leading institutions in terms of international enrollment. going on more than 15 years, actually. So we've taken pride in that, and the fact that these students contribute a great deal, not only in terms of their economic impact, but in terms of all the ways they contribute to our education, our research, our service missions. And, you know, a declining number is not a good thing for us in many respects. And I think the last few years has seen a general posture that has not been particularly welcoming to international students and other kinds of visitors. And I think the uncertainties about the policy framework, the context and environment has made some students very uncertain about pursuing an education in the United States, even though the United States continues to be the top choice among prospective international students globally. I don't think there's any doubt about that. We have the best universities overall, although many countries are becoming much better in that regard and are competing with us around the world. But there is a sense that we're not the magnet we once were, and we in the higher education area certainly want to do everything we can to welcome our students from around the world, to encourage them to come here, and to provide the kind of services and support that will make their transition to study in the United States successful, so they can accomplish their professional and educational objectives. Beyond the loss to enrollment and associated revenue, this decline that we've seen, I think, negatively impacts American soft diplomacy and general awareness of the United States around the world. For many years, through Fulbright and other programs, we've taken pride in attracting and educating the future leaders of other countries, most of whom get to know American culture and remain friendly to our country once they go back home. And I think, one could say this is particularly concerning with respect to China, as we have been veering toward a kind of, it's perhaps unfair to call it a Cold War with China, but there's a lot of rhetoric that reminds us of the old days with the Soviet Union. And of course, China as an adversary is in many ways much stronger, much more durable than the old Soviet Union. From the point of view of international educators, at least, maintaining engagement and exchange is vital in the current environment of growing distance and distrust. While China should not be underestimated as a potential adversary, we can all hope that the new administration will see the value of renewed engagement going forward. I'm not especially sanguine about dramatic reversals, with respect to China in terms of policy and posture. And I'm not an expert on US relations with China, but I gather there will be some changes to trade policy, if only to benefit our own businesses, our farmers, for example. But initial signals from China don't suggest a warm reception for the incoming Biden administration, and that may be troubling in itself. With that, I'll end my part, and I look forward to your comments, your thoughts and questions during the rest of the program, and I thank you again for the opportunity.
Thanks, John. We appreciate your kind of letting us look under the hood on everything going on there. If you have a question for Dr. Wood, please go ahead and throw it in the chat. I have a question, and you went big. You got bigger and bigger as you got to the end. I want to take it back local. Obviously, maybe something you couldn't, UB couldn't prepare for the fall semester, but definitely as you're looking to the spring. Business First put out an article last week talking about international students at all the schools in Western New York, and everybody's done. Niagara University down 8%, Medaille down 12%, DeUville down 12%, Canisius down 12%. ECC down 43% of international students. How has that affected programs and curriculum? Because I'm assuming now there are programs and curriculum that just simply don't have enough students in them right now. What does that look like for spring of 2021?
That's a very good question, because one of the areas most impacted in the fall were the master degree programs in STEM fields and engineering. We have a large number of international students who enroll in those programs, computer science being the largest, but there are a number of others. And of course, in other areas as well, including the School of Management. And these programs really have depended on these large international enrollments. So one of the issues those units were contending with was, could we enroll students, first of all, online instead of their actually being here in person? And as I noted in my remarks, there were students who did avail themselves of that opportunity, but it was a relatively small number, particularly at the graduate level. And one of the reasons for that is I mentioned optional practical training and curricular practical training. Those opportunities for work experience are so critical to these students that they don't want to take any chances with them. And one of the concerns is if they enroll online for the first semester, that will disrupt their planning, particularly for example, next summer, summer 21, and accessing practical training at that time, internships and the like. So that was one big part of the calculus for students who are looking at this kind of program. Because in STEM fields and engineering, for example, a student who does one of those master's degrees can, generally speaking, access a total of 3 years in practical training, which is really a great opportunity. Computer science, for example, some of our students will go to the West Coast and work for a Google or an Amazon. And then they're in a position where they can get an H-1B visa, a work visa, and eventually, if they're lucky, a green card. So that kind of a pathway is certainly the dream of many students who come here, particularly if they're doing an advanced degree. But those programs did take a hit, and as I noted, the students whom they hoped would be able to defer to spring, and so the School of Engineering was looking at how they could ramp up the course sections in those relevant areas for spring semester, where they don't normally have a lot of new students. They're finding they're not going to see those students as they had hoped because of the continuing pandemic situation, the continuing issues with travel, the continuing issues with visas, and so on. So UB, unlike some of the private institutions in Western New York that took a bigger hit, we've been fortunate in some ways because we were able to make up for shortfalls through domestic enrollment. And I credit my colleagues across the institution. This is not certainly the international office that was really responsible. It was, for example, in those engineering programs I talked about, there was a real effort to recruit some of our graduating seniors in engineering to stay on and do a master's degree. Part of the rationale there, of course, is the employment situation. And, the timing of this might be fortuitous for them to do a master's degree. Normally students would go right into the workforce because they have so many career opportunities. We also were very successful in drawing more domestic undergraduates. So we ended up having a larger undergraduate enrollment in fall of 2020 than we did in fall of 2019. Now, in the domestic side as well, you have a lot of students who are studying remotely. So it's a mixed picture, but I think in general, you could say UB did pretty well relative to some other institutions that have taken a bigger hit.
Thanks, John. Before we go to Professor Liu to hear from the Confucius Institute, I have one more question, and I want to ask it just because I think it's relevant to the on the workforce side too for some of our companies. And I don't know if it's something you can answer, but I want to put it out there. You talked about the hurdles for someone coming from China. First, they have to go to another country, quarantine. They have to quarantine here. There's the visa issue and everything. And we've seen this on the in the private sector too with work visas. Is that there's also a sentiment there that some people just don't want to be in the United States right now because of COVID and the response and the problems. How much, maybe anecdotally even, was that an issue?
Oh yeah, a very good question, because it is an issue, most definitely. For example, in the summer, We had communications from some of the families, parents of students who intended to come here, and many of them were not able to, as I said. But when it was still considered a possibility, they were still hoping for a visa appointment and so on. The parents expressed concern certainly about, the public health situation. And, there were concerns about, frankly, about the protests and the street violence that they saw in the news. So there were issues that would be concerning to any parent. And one of the things that some of those folks were looking at was, well, could the students who were planning to begin at UB in fall of 2020, could they, for fall semester, go to a partner institution in China and study there instead, and then transfer their credits? Some institutions in the United States did utilize that expedient because the students that couldn't come would just start their studies at a local institution in China. Some of which were happy to do that. We weren't in a position to do that at UB, but I know some other institutions did do that. And so, I mean, it just speaks to the demand that was there and the fact that so many students were unable to travel.
John, thank you. We appreciate it. I'm not seeing any questions in there. If anyone has questions offline for Dr. Wood about what's going on at UB or higher education, feel free to email Ashik and me, and we can get you in touch with John offline. But thank you. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Let me turn to Professor Liu and the Confucius Institute. Hoping you can give us some observations of what you've seen, over the past 8, 9, 10 months here in 2020.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara for inviting us once again to co-sponsor this year's China Town Hall. Thank you, Ashika, for all the email exchanges and phone conversations with us during the planning stage of this week's events. You are always open-minded and welcomed our inputs. It was a great pleasure to work with you. Of course, thank you, Craig, for moderating this discussion. Well, I will be brief. My talk will be divided into 2 parts. One, I want to give you a brief introduction about Confucius Institute, and then I'll talk about how the COVID affect our activities and how we responded to the challenges. UB Confucius Institute is a collaborative program between UB and its longtime partner, Capital Normal University in Beijing. The institute was established in 2009 and has been partly funded by Hanban, an organization under China's Ministry of Education, and partly funded by University at Buffalo. The institute operates in accordance with academic policies of UB and laws and regulations of the United States. UB Confucius Institute has 3 main programs. First, we help Western New York K-12 schools and UB develop Chinese language programs. We bring Chinese guest teachers from China to teach Chinese in local schools. Before the pandemic, we had 7 to 12 guest teachers in any given academic year for a long time. We also bring visiting professors from China to teach in 2 UB departments. So far, over 5,000 K-12 students from the Western New York area have learned Chinese from our guest teachers, and hundreds of UB students have done the same. The second thing we do is that we work to foster a better understanding of Chinese cultural traditions in contemporary China through organizing cultural events such as Chinese New Year celebration, Mid-Autumn Festival, and a host of other activities throughout the year, both on UB campus and off UB campus in collaboration with local schools and organizations. The third program we run is to promote and support China-related teaching and research at UB. We sponsor and co-organize academic conferences, symposia, lecture series with individual departments and programs. We organize China study tours for UB students and help them apply for scholarships to study in Chinese university for a semester or more. So you can see that we're in the business of building a better relation between US and China and contribute to UB academically and contribute to local schools and local community in terms of Chinese language teaching, in terms of cultural activities. While COVID forced us to move some of our events online to the extent possible and canceled or postpone others until after pandemic. For example, we canceled the Chinese New Year celebration back in February because the concern about the coronavirus in very early stage. This is a major cultural event we hold annually at UB Center for the Arts, showcasing the beauty and diversity of Chinese culture. Many people were very, very disappointed that we had to cancel the event. Another major event, UB's CI sponsored conference on environmental issues was also postponed. Despite many cancellations and postponements, we were still able to hold quite a number of lectures and cultural events online in the past 8 months, and more are planned for the rest of the year. As a response to the pandemic, we teamed up with 5 other Confucius Institute in the Great Lakes region to share our resources and co-organize online activities. We help each other promote each other's event so that any activity we host actually reach a broader and larger audience beyond the Western New York area. For example, the workshop we organized in September. This is an online workshop on teaching Chinese course online, attracted more than 50 participants. A workshop like this, if held in person, is expected to have something like 15 to 25 people top. The biggest impact of COVID is felt in our K-12 programs and 2 China-related teaching programs at UB. The Chinese guest teachers come to Buffalo on J visa and with a 2-year appointment. 5 of our teachers finished their service in June and returned to China. With COVID out of control in the United States and elsewhere in the world, the guest teacher program was suspended in China. So it's this program sponsored by China, of course, and it was suspended by China. Understandably, people do not want to come to the US in the middle of a pandemic. On top of the COVID, President Trump issued an executive order early this year, banning specifically the visa program for K-12 guest teachers until the end of this year. Assuming the Biden administration will let the ban run out, we will not expect to have any new guest teachers, at least until fall 2021, because recruitment and visa application takes months. Currently, we are down to only 2 guest teachers. From last year, at the beginning of last year, I had 7. But fortunately, we were able to provide funds to local schools to hire substitute teachers in the current fall semester. We plan to do the same for them in 2021 and hope this K-12 program can continue through these challenging times of the pandemic and problematic US-China relations. We also have had 2 UBCI-sponsored visiting professors for many years. One of them teaches the Department of Linguistics, and the other teaches in the graduate certification program in teaching Chinese as a second language. The latter finished her term appointment in June, returned to China, and the visiting professor in the linguistics department will return to China at the end of this year. So again, because of COVID, we could not recruit replacement. So as we normally do for these 2 positions, unfortunately. So at least UB lost 2 full-time instructors due to the COVID, and Trump's multi-front fight against China is not helping in this regard as well. So we a piece of good news, we helped the Department of Art recruit a visiting professor who was supposed to come and teach in spring 2020. The pandemic changed that plan as well. But fortunately, we were able to arrange this would-be visiting professor to teach 2 courses remotely from China. So that was a happy ending, but I imagine it must be very tough for the professor given the 12-hour time differences between Buffalo and Beijing. So the COVID has definitely had a negative impact on us, but we learned to adapt to the challenging environment and found ways to continue with all 3 programs. So that's K-12 Chinese language instruction, cultural activities, and China-related teaching and research at UB. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there any questions for Professor Liu? We'd like to thank you, Professor Liu, for sharing. Sorry, I heard a noise in the background there. We've got about 10 minutes left. I wanted to see if we could hear from any of the companies that are on. I know John DeLuca from Liberty Pumps and Alex Siegel from Conex are here. They'll both be on our panel next week. John or Alex, maybe could I enlist you to say just a few, maybe a quick overview of some of the things you're seeing and maybe what we're going to get into next week at our panel discussion?
Yeah, this is John DeLuca. Can you hear me?
Yes, John, thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm going to try and open up there's my video.
There he is.
Yeah, we're seeing quite a bit of disruption due to the pandemic both in our supply chain, because we bring some of our supplies in from China. We're also seeing disruption as far as selling into China. China is our largest, next to Canada, China is our largest international market. So the pandemic really has been a challenge for us, but the good thing is that our business colleagues in China remain very loyal. They say that there's still, a desire to have American-made products in that market. So we're limping along and doing okay. It's not like we're not selling into China, but it's less than last year and less than we expected. Our supply chain disruption actually has been a bit more of a challenge and a problem for us than the other way around. But I have to say, as of recent months, we've pretty much caught up with those disruptions and things are back to normal.
Thanks, John. Just this past week, I've got some statistics that in October, the Chinese exports grew at the fastest pace in a year and a half, and imports also rose too. A lot of it fueled by medical supplies to support, anti-COVID efforts around the world. But the relationship with Europe is going to be interesting going forward, and something I'm sure we're going to talk about next week, given some pretty strict lockdowns happening now in Europe that are affecting those markets. Alex, do you have a couple thoughts on where Conex is?
Yeah, so let's see here. All right. Yeah, COVID caught us all by surprise. And I remember at the very beginning wondering if this was going to have a lasting impact, and thinking somewhat naively now in retrospect that this was going to be another maybe more significant flu season. Obviously, that hasn't been the case. And what we're seeing from a market perspective, yes, there was some initial disruptions in the supply chain. We are, whether it's Europe or different countries throughout Asia, including China, we're all much more integrated than we were 20 years ago. That's the reality. What we see right now in the short term has actually been very favorable for us, because one of the biggest markets that has seen an uptick globally has been raw materials for the e-commerce economy. So more servers, more laptops, more phones, more tablets being sold. And of course, we sell products that support that. And the product quality that we have from out of Buffalo is such that our Chinese customers are very much requesting our product. The challenge that we see is with not so much on the COVID side, but actually on the trade relationship side. What happens with our relationship with China as a mutual trade partner if China is concerned that they can't have a consistent and dependable supply from the United States? So if that's the case, does China start to try to localize production? And that, I look at this as a long-term question. This isn't something that's happening right now. There is no substitute for our product, but we want to make sure that as members of the global economy, trade partners with China, that we continue to provide a value that is accessible. And so that actually gets into lots of trade concerns. It may be less of a COVID-related issue, but it certainly has long-term implications for both our customers in China and ourselves.
Alex, thank you. I actually jotted down some other notes this week. President Xi had at a press conference, had a couple of key points on his agenda. Said China can become a high-income country by 2025 and double the size of the economy by 2035. But the piece that you just mentioned, when he was asked about the world becoming unfriendly to China, said that they can rely on their own domestic market to meet those numbers and those projections. So right along with what you were saying there. So let me open up. We wanted to do an hour, so we've got just a couple minutes left. Is there any other questions anybody would like to ask? We've got all kinds of expertise on this call, so please take advantage of it. I'll give a second to see if anything comes through. In the meantime, I will again plug the rest of the program. After this, if you haven't received it already, after this roundtable's over, you'll get a link for this evening's event with Ray Dalio, which is the actual Chinatown Hall from the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, and Ashika's bringing that up now. Then we are working on we're paying close attention to the event on the 17th, also at 7 o'clock p.m., which is the Economics and Trade Forum. And then our local, we'll get local again next week on the 19th with Alex and John and Professor Poon from UB. And that runs from 3 to 4 o'clock next Thursday. And then we want to plug one other event that we have coming up, which is this Thursday. I know we're going out of chronological order here, but our annual meeting and report to members is this Thursday at 3 o'clock. It's an hour. We're going to talk about World Trade Center Buffalo Niagara, how we've weathered the COVID-19 storm, and we're very excited to hear from Adam Pratt, who's the president of Sherex Fastening Solutions, who is going to talk about where they've been in 2020, and they've been weathering the storm themselves, and believe they're in a good place for 2021, and have a great story building off of a rapid expansion they were having when this all started at the beginning of the year. So we encourage you to join us for our annual meeting on this coming Thursday. So with that, let me my chat window closed. Sorry, let me just see. No other questions came in. So with that, let me thank you all for being here. We appreciate you giving us some time today. We hope that you'll continue along in the rest of the pieces of the puzzle. Ashika reminded me that the 7 o'clock sessions, the one tonight and the one next Thursday, will be recorded, so you don't have to watch them as they happen. You'll be able to watch them whenever it's convenient for you. With that, let me thank John. Let me thank Professor Liu, and thanks to John and Alex for weighing in. Thanks again, Ashika, for managing everything here as we're putting the program together. Thanks to the University of Buffalo. Thanks to the UB Confucius Institute. Thank you to the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations. And we appreciate you all being here, and look forward to seeing you next week. We'll see you tonight at the 7 o'clock session, but we'll physically see you next week. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
So long.